I got one more wrestling topic from another email that it tickles me. This is not quite as tickling as the previous one. It's a legitimate question. But Rick asked, please elaborate on how the NWA champion was booked, how the schedule worked, and how the champion knew where to be and how to get there. Plane ticket versus you drive, etc. Were all payoffs in cash? Did Flair have thousands on him at all times? Can the champion say no to the office? A lot of questions there. But, I mean, a lot of people have seen on Twitter recently, some of the historians have dug up in their research and found some of the old NWA champions booking schedules on the official NWA letterhead, right? Where it would say January 1st, Atlanta, January 2nd through 7th, Florida, January 8th, St. Louis, etc. And he'd go for a few months, right? You've seen a bunch of those.
Yeah, I think Matt Farmer actually tweeted out.
Yes.
Not too long ago, one of those. For Flair.
And, yeah, for Flair, and other people have tweeted out when Harley was champion or whatever, this was his schedule for a couple months. And it's so cute because some people said, well, look, at least 2nd through the 7th, he's in Florida so he can relax. And that meant you were in the Florida territory. If they just put on the NWA champion schedule 2 through 7 Florida, that meant the 2nd you were in Tampa, the 3rd you were in St. Pete, the 4th you were in Miami, the 5th you were in Tallahassee, 6th you were in Jacksonville. If they had a double shot on a Sunday, you were there at both of them. So they just listed Florida or Charlotte instead of the Carolinas. You'd be in Charlotte for several days in a row. But those schedules show that the NWA champion was working almost every day of the month in multiple territories for 2 and 3 months at a time. And then you'd have the one, it would say October 4 through 7, Charlotte, October 8th, fucking Dallas, October 9th, you'd be back in the Charlotte territory. Yeah, but you had to go out and make that one Dallas shot because it might be a big show at Reunion Arena. Or, you know, what some of those were just ridiculous. You had to go to St. Louis because St. Louis was the crown jewel of the NWA. So whatever territory you were in, you had to come back and make the St. Louis show. Who booked the schedule was usually Sam Muchnick until what period in the 70s when he turned it over to Jim Barnett.
Maybe when Terry became champion?
Possibly, when Muchnick was getting older and, you know. But the point was that usually the NWA champion, or in Barnett's case, he was the secretary treasurer, but someone high up in the NWA kept the NWA champion's dates, had a separate book just for him, whoever that title was bestowed on, and then that champion would get the instructions from the person in the NWA that was booking him. And it was Sam Muchnick usually, especially for so many years at the start, because he was the one that knew all the promoters and could make sure there was no tomfoolery going on with the belt and et cetera, et cetera. But promoters months out, just like with Andre the Giant, would contact the NWA office and say, when can I get the champion? They might be booking so far ahead there'd be a title change, but they would just want the NWA champion to come in for their big show or come in for a series of shows 4 or 5 days that week or whatever. And so the guy booking the champion would keep those dates in his book and would forward whatever the means was at the time. They used to do telegrams, mail packages, because the champion didn't always live in St. Louis. So periodically his shit would be delivered to his house. Then when faxes came in and et cetera. And then also not like 2 months of plane tickets would show up at Harley Race's house, you know, in one package. A lot of times the offices would work together. The champion, before he left home for a tour, would have most, if not all, of his tickets to get him back. Or elsewise, if it was a long tour and he was going to be gone 2 or 3 weeks at a time or over to Japan, there would be packages sent along the way. And it wasn't unusual. Ask Flair, ask Dory, Terry, anybody. When something might change and you're on the road, you would go in your pocket and you would get yourself a plane canceled or a show canceled, or I got to get back to somewhere else, or there's bad weather coming in. The champion knew that he was too valuable to the operation to just sit around and wait to be told what to do or how to get somewhere. So he would take it upon himself to get where the next place he had to be was, and then he would get his money back from the office. And that goes for most of the top guys in the territories. I bet Lawler was on the way to Evansville one time when he lived in Hendersonville. So it was only a 3-hour drive, but he was on, I think it was 24. He wasn't even to the Tennessee state line. He hits a fucking deer, runs across the road, tears his car up. He's stuck. So he was close enough to Nashville. He was able to somehow get a ride back. And so many people, or Jerry Jarrett and those guys, they knew so many people in Nashville from promoting there for so many years. They got him out to the airport and got him in a chartered plane and got him to Evansville in time to work the main event, because they had 1,000 people there that would have been highly fucking pissed if Lawler didn't make it. But, so there was obviously a level of the office having taken care of everything for the guys, but they also had to be able to think on their feet. And you've heard stories guys used to, in the old days, before even jet planes or before the interstates, where they would have these hell trips and crawl across broken glass to get to St. Louis or major towns. And that was part of being a champion. You didn't just put the belt on the best wrestler, you put the belt on the guy that you could depend on. That's why it was so rare that it was ever switched in those days. We're all payoffs in cash, not necessarily. Sam Muchnick did. That's why guys like to work St. Louis. And remember, Bruiser used to tell the story if his payoff was supposed to be $752.26, based on Muchnick's formula for calculating the gate, he would get an envelope with that money in cash, including a quarter and a penny in it. A lot of territories paid by check, although the champion could always get a cash draw out of the box office at any town he was at, but they would pay by check. But the one thing you weren't going to do if you were an NWA promoter in those days was bounce a check to the NWA champion, because you also were sending a check to the NWA for the booking of the champion. That's why either Muchnick or Barnett or somebody trusted did it. They got, what was it? Was it 5% in the early days and then 3%, or was it always 3%?
I'm not sure. It was definitely 3% in the later years, but I'm not sure.
And that's the point, is the promoters a lot of times would pay by check, and they'd have to send a statement in, because the champion in the glory days was getting a percentage of the house. And whether it was 8 for the champion and 3 or 5 for the NWA or whatever the case, that was different with every gate. There was no guarantee per se, but the champion also didn't get booked in many of the small towns, and definitely not when Muchnick had control, so he didn't have to worry about going into a $50 payoff. Did Flair have thousands on him at all times? Yes, until he got to the bar. Then he had literally tens on him, if that. But no, a lot of the guys then in those days, yes. We've mentioned I have copies of the payoff ledgers of the St. Louis Wrestling Club for the St. Louis payoffs, and I've talked to guys that in the office in the WWF, a sellout crowd world championship match in St. Louis, we know for a fact, was worth $6,000 or better to each guy in it in the late 70s, early 80s. Around that same time, mid-70s, a main event championship match in Madison Square Garden for the challenger was worth $5 or $6 grand. George Steele was a good head for remembering figures and house figures and payoffs of the different eras and everything, so I've tried to glean information from him. And, a lot of times guys wanted cash. So, yes, there was a lot of cash being carried around in those days. And can the champion say no to the office? It depends on which office. Champion could always say no to the regional office, although they tried to work as best they could, especially depending on who it was. to the NWA office itself, yes, I'm sure that all the champions had disagreements with Muchnick or Barnett or whatever, but overall it was a give and take thing where it wasn't just even the NWA champion back then was not demanding creative control. It was just that it was a guy that was smart enough to the business that he knew a stupid finish or a good finish when he heard one. So I'm sure there were plenty of discussions of finishes back and forth, but it wasn't like the champion was going to say, no, I'm not going to go to fucking Kansas City that week. That was part of the job. You pretty much took the schedule. That's why all the guys that got the title and wanted it and worked hard for it eventually asked to fucking drop it because they would crack eventually, except Flair.
That's what I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you, did anyone enjoy that lifestyle and that schedule more than Flair?
No, Flair's the only one that never asked out that I can think of. Terry gave it up on purpose. Dory gave it up on purpose. Briscoe gave it up on purpose. Harley was an Iron Man, but even then, I think there was, a couple times there he was like, especially after the long run, wasn't he like, it's ready, I'm time for me. But Flair loved it. He would have done it forever. He was the only person who, as Arn used to say, he's not from here. He's from another planet. He was the only one that could do it.
A planet filled with kamikazes, I imagine.
Thez, it took Thez, remember in the 50s, he had it 8 years straight. And that was before interstates and when the rings were a lot harder. And then finally he was like, okay, it's time for me to leave. So that he was probably second place Iron Man. And with Bruno, not the NWA title, but Bruno gave it up both times.
Bruno gave up the opportunity to unify the NWA and WWF titles in a match with Thez because he was already sick of the WWF schedule. He didn't want the NWA schedule too.
Yeah, but he didn't give up the opportunity single-handed because Lou Thez gave up the opportunity for him when they wouldn't give Thez $100,000 to do the job.
That's true.
So it was never going to happen because if the only way they would have had that match is if Bruno could have won it, and the only way that Bruno could have won it, all respect to Bruno, for heaven's sake, is if they'd have paid Thez the $100,000. And what would that be today, in today's money, from the 1966? $500,000, $750,000, something like that? Anyway, you know what? The best way to study these incredible facts and figures that we're spitting out to the people. The best way to do that, Brian?
I'm not sure, but to answer your question, approximately $807,000.
There you go. All they'd had to pay Lou Thez was $807,000 to do a job for Bruno, and they could have had the one and truly only world championship. And they could have fucking put 40,000 people in Shea Stadium. So they'd have made some of it back right there. But anyway, the way to listen to all these things, Brian, you'll never guess. It's with Raycon earbuds. The Raycon wireless earbuds that sound great. It's just like that old saying, taste great, less filling. They sound great, but they don't hurt your ears. They don't have wires and stems sticking out of them. They come in a range of stylish colors. The comfortable in-ear fit. You can listen to things you want to listen to rather than the outside world nattering away at you. Water, sweat-resistant construction. I don't dunk my head underwater. I'm not a person that does that, but if you're a person that does, you can still get away with it. You can pair these things to your Bluetooth, even all of your Bluetooth. However many you don't have as many Bluetooths as you used to, Brian. You had a couple pulled, but you can pair these to your Bluetooth or your green tooth, your brown tooth, whatever color tooth you have. Enough battery life for 6 hours of playtime so you can unplug and you can listen to the average John Moxley interview within 6 hours. And the best part, great sound accessible to everyone, starting at half the price of other premium audio brands. Folks, Raycon is one of our favorite sponsors. We talk about them often, and the fans love them. And right now, Raycon's offering 15% off everything on their site just for the cult of Cornette. Go to buyraycon, BUYRAYCON, buyraycon.com Raycon.com/JCE. And that's it. That's the heavy lifting. You're going to get 15% off your entire Raycon order. So you can grab a pair for you and a spare pair for you. I've mentioned my Aunt Gretel. She got 2 pair and then gave one of them away. Not 1 pair, just 1 earbud, because that way she had one for each of her ears. And little Geppetto, her son, was able to use his for the 1 ear that he had, because it was they shared a lot of chromosomes in that family. Anyway, go to buyraycon, BUYRAYCON.com/JCE and get 15% off your entire Raycon order. 15% off at buyraycon.com/JCE. Did I ever tell you about my little cousin Geppetto?
I don't believe so.
He worked for a furniture manufacturer. One day he's in the plant and he reaches over for his bottle of Coca-Cola and he takes a big drink and drinks it all down, but it was a bottle of furniture polish instead. Dropped down on the floor right there, killed him graveyard dead. Furniture polish. It was a horrible way to go, but a beautiful finish.
Awful.
It was awful.
Terrible
awful,
joke.
Awful.
Oh,
Terrible
God.
tragedy. Terrible tragedy.